my view and others, Australia is very much at a crossroads. And we live in a country that is incredibly complacent about its regulatory systems. And this is against a global background of absolutely vast technological change, which we're going to show you today. This is really all about, in part, getting rid of the hype. And like the dot-com boom of yesteryear, there's an awful lot of hype in this. And I want to talk a bit about the reality. Now, there is no such thing, by the way, as artificial intelligence. It does not exist. And you'll see reference in the media, particularly to what's now called artificial general intelligence, which is moved towards so-called artificial intelligence, but it's a long way off in the sense of cognitive understanding as a human being. What you can do, and this is what we specialize in, is making enterprises intelligent, and hence the logo Intelligent Enterprise Workflow Automation. So most of what you see, 95% of what you see, is in fact workflow automation, and then the smart deployment of what are smart technologies, even though themselves they're not actually intelligent. So we do this in any language, up to 50 languages, anywhere, anytime, any industry, including wealth management. Now, where are we with the regulatory system? In a mess, basically. And the Corporations Act, as you can see in that, this is what I presented actually this time last year. That's the size of the Corporations Act, and it keeps growing, mainly through the issue of legislative instruments, which ASIC issue. But there's 3 million words in that, and growing. Now, a very important part of what you do is to do with this Section 994, which is the design and distribution obligations. And I'm going to quote from my book. It's from Stephen Rares, who's a senior federal court judge. "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." And that's a direct quote from Dante Alighieri's Inferno, Book 4. And he goes on to say, "A professional does not discharge any duty of disclosure or adequately explain a complex transaction merely by giving its client a copy of voluminous documentation." And that's often what you see in target market determinations. Now, there's 16 ASIC-inspired litigations at the moment on that, and the infractions are pretty minor, but the penalties are huge. Now, you as financial advisors don't have to yourselves write or issue a target market determination, but you certainly have to make sure that you meet the applicability test for your clients, and you certainly have a common law duty of care in addition to the statutory requirements. So don't think that you can't do anything with target market determinations, because you can and you should. And the other thing I would alert you to is that the particular legislation talks about financial consumer as well as retail investor. So they've conflated the two, and the genesis of that is bringing not only the ASIC Act, but the Corporations Act, the ACCC Act, but also the National Consumer Credit Act into one piece of legislation without defining who's who in this particular zoo. So a financial consumer is all of us, whether we're categorised as retail investors or wholesale investors or professional, whatever it is. And even that's a pig's ear of a mess for people in professions. So you need to really have a close look at this DDO thing. It's a trap for the unwary, and make sure, and I'm sure Lifestyle does, have a compliance system to cope for it. Now, I was at an AICD lunch with us ASIC commissioners the other week, and I was asked about my views about where we're all at with all of this, and I said my honest answer was, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And it doesn't matter how many royal commissions we have, how many reviews we have, how many reports there are from the ALRC, nothing changes. And without radical change to the legal architecture, then we're going to continue with more of the same. And bit by bit, everything grinds ever slower. So the next piece of regulation that we're seeing big time and I was in Sydney last week, and on everybody's lips was this issue of unrealised capital gains tax. And that's going to affect everything that we do. So it's going to affect the bottom half, 2/3 even of the ASX. It's going to potentially destroy the managed investment schemes industry. It's probably going to destroy the venture capital industry and the ability of young companies, SMEs or otherwise, to raise capital. And it's going to affect superannuation. Now, it's not yet legislated, but it's due to be retrospectively active from the 1st of July. And I can tell you that people all over the place are moving assets around right now before the 30th of June. So ultimately, the only rules that the HO seem to want to follow are those by a full court, or at least a majority opinion of the High Court. So this is, if it is finally enacted in August, then this is going to roll around the economy and slow everything down. A piece of industrial relations associated legislation now is the ability of employees and consultants, particularly if you're earning under $175,000 a year, to basically walk down the road with all of your intellectual property. And unless you contractually have bound them as fiduciaries, you don't have actually much defence to that particular statutory provision. Now, these things are all in the press virtually every day, you know. And there was a great article just the other day by one of Australia's leading investors, a guy called Mark Carnegie, and to quote from the article in his op-ed, "Without clear and robust rules, trillion-dollar opportunities will sail straight past our shores." And that's exactly what will happen and already is. And just so you know, the Singaporean government already have a program, a government-funded program to come and poach Australian entrepreneurs, move them and us to Singapore. So the chuck stuff is all over the press, you know. But we can't do much about this because there's this complacency, and unfortunately at government level, people are uncurious about the economic effects of what they're doing. Now, in the media, there's been a lot about this in the media. Chris Merritt, who writes regularly in The Australian, he's from the Rule of Law Institute, and he's now saying that, and this is the Corporations Act specifically, the written statute no longer means what it says, and the senior justices agree with him. Why would anyone invest? And legislative bulk is not better law. So unless you change that sort of paradigm, and it's going to be, you know, a lot of lobbying and political pressure to do that, that's where we're at. James Shepton, who many of you would have heard of, talks about it as being unreconcilable expectations, poor architecture designed to fail. And by the way, I'll give myself a plug, he loves what I've written globally on this. Now, in the class action space, I did a global webinar last year. There's been no needed law reform since I was last here on the class action space, but the link to that webinar is down the bottom, and it really takes us into the second part of this presentation, which is in the AI and technology space. So the particular class actions that the webinar was about, it's about an hour long, but if you go to minute 40 or something like that, you get the gist of the conclusions to it. But it was the people of the United States, and separately the children of the United States, the Microsoft and OpenAI, and dare I say it, Mr. Musk. So these are huge class actions that are being heard in New York, in Illinois, in Chicago, and the Northern District of California. So, you know, we're talking about multi-tens of billions of dollars, and the key to it is the unjust enrichment by these so-called large language model providers of private property. So, and that would include probably my phone and everybody else's iPhone, which has been scraped. And it brings me to the point that when you're using large language models, you do not want to input private data. And more on that right now. So people talk about AI generically. What they don't understand is that there's two AI industries. And the left hand of that triangle is the so-called large language models. So these are, you know, the Amazons and the OpenAIs and all of those sorts of things. And that's all big game. And that's going to end up as an oligopoly, just like the internet is. And unless you're in the top of the triangle, you're going to be nowhere. But that's not a game that Australians could readily play, in the sense that you're talking huge dollars to build and maintain and grow those models, because they all have to be constantly trained. The real game is on the left, and it's what people call agentic AI scaffold. And it's these agents, these AI agents, or we would used to call them apps. This is what we do on 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. How do you start? What do you do? And that's where the real game is, both from a user perspective of all of this technology and from an investment perspective. So the way that we do it at Actium is that we have what we call the enterprise egg. So we certainly use any one of the large language models on the planet. It can be Google Gemini, and there's now 250,000 of these things around. But before we use them, we actually must put a private data protective membrane around it. So for professional use, you need to use obviously all the public data that's out there, the trillions of pages of it, but you've got to apply it for your own personal private circumstances. And that means that private data, when you upload it, has to be de-identified. And not to de-identify it raises the issues of claims in negligence. Then you've got all of the apps, both our legal linguistics robotics, which is the legal veracity part of it, and then all of these hundreds of thousands of of agentic AI agents. Right? Then you have to de-identify it to get the output, and you have to have that all in a secure shell, either at a data center, secure data center, or indeed in your own going back to your own server facilities. Now, process automation rests upon every concept inside and every technology that sits inside the egg. So when you're going to deploy AI, so-called, you're going to deploy a basket of technologies, not just one. And that's what gives you the usability of it and the functionality as professionals. So in a sense, you've got this banner. You start off process automation, then you've got the machine learning part of it, you've got the so-called AI part of it, and then you've got the interpretive part of it. So it's that process that you implement in any one of these applications. Now, where you end up is all of these functionalities. So the massive data crunching is what the large language models provide. The privacy is the de-identification and re-identification of the data, input and output. The legal and compliance veracity is what we bring with the legal linguistics. No one else has got that. And then you've got the end use, what do I do at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning stuff, which is the agentic AI scaffolds, which is the specific applications for your specific use. And then you say, well, we've got all of this in our bag. How do we market that, both internally, say lifestyle to all of you good people, but also to recruit others in any industry? So all of that technology is here in this room right now. Now, what we do to operationalize all of this is use what we call orchestration platforms. And Nate, whom I would introduce, Nate's the leader of our artificial intelligence AI initiatives, and also the inventor of the Archimedes legal linguistics robot. Nate's going to give anyone that would like it a demonstration real-time online at the back of the room through the day. So you can say, right, this is my application, and by the way, how do we orchestrate it? So what that orchestration platform does is bring together all of the 250,000 large language models, plus about 750,000 linear regression correlation type models, and it can integrate with any of those. It then brings together all of the input public data sources, all of the legal linguistics protocols, and all of the things that create more EBITDA, and importantly, the value of digitization for your enterprise or anybody else's. We then integrate, we can do the data integrations across any publicly available data, and then having de-identified it, your private data. On top of that, you can get all of these people involved, if you wish, on enterprise software integrations, social media integrations, including LinkedIn, which now has 1 billion users, and corporate software database integrations, right? So if people have been used to the historical use of coding in Python or something like that, that really is becoming, to an extent, obsolete. These large language models are not measured anymore by lines of code. They're measured by parameters, which are essentially A, B, X, Y relationships. And the larger ones now up to 30, 40 trillion parameters. And that's why they seem intelligent. They're both quick because of the computing power, but they seem intelligent because of their ability to quickly read and interpret 30, 40 trillion parameters. So all of that gets you to say, where do we start? So the starting point really is here. Sitting around the office desk, or more often the coffee shop desk, and saying, what do we need to do to automate our business? And then what we're going to show you today as you go through that process is the automatic, or the automated version of that on a live robot. So that's a simple process. It takes a little bit of effort, obviously, and time to do that. But getting that bit right with the two gentlemen on the scrap of paper is the key to it. And ultimately, the driver that you're trying to get to is increasing your EBITDA and increasing your PE multiples through digitization. So the starting point then leads you to say, right, we don't want all of the stuff off the large language models necessarily. What we do want is our own knowledge. We want to ask questions of these models and techniques, and then we want a reasoned response. And Nate's going to show you an example of that in a minute. So our starting point whenever we work with anybody is to say, right, where are you today? What do you have to do? And what does that mean in terms of shareholder value? Because at the end of the day, we're here for profit. And whilst this is intellectually stimulating, it's got to be a business in what is an economy that's making life tougher every day. So we start off by saying, right, how can you get productivity uplifts out of deploying these technologies? What does that mean if you wanted to sell your business in 10 years? And so on. And we work back from that in terms of what you have to do today and in terms of which of these agentic AI apps you need to deploy. So right now, sitting here in this room, we can deliver a starter pack of 80 AI robots, 80 of them. And you know, we obviously have this list of what they do and who they are and whatever. But and these are working right now. Now the way it works is basically taking your piece of paper in the coffee shop, you know, and your flow charting that comes from that, and automating all of that. So this is what we call an orchestration. These are what we call orchestration platforms, and this particular one is lead enhancement. So some of the input, the web scraping, for instance, that could be the billion people on LinkedIn. And with the changes in LinkedIn's business model, it's actually an ideal data input. So it takes you right through to producing the output, which is a research report. And it does this in about 30 seconds. All right? So there's no way a human can even start doing this in 30 seconds. So the starting point is marketing by lead enhancement. Then you say, well, what do I want out of the end of all of this, which is the research request. And again, that's about a 30-second process. Then it does the research globally. So if we wanted to look for advisors locally or Australia, New Zealand wide or globally, we can do that. And if we don't have specific names, we can do it by groups and demographics and that sort of stuff. And as I say, we can do it right through LinkedIn. So it goes through again in seconds and reads all of the relevant websites that it finds. It then analyzes all of that and writes a report. So, you know, John Doe, which is the example that we've got in financial planning space, says, well, who's John Doe? What does he do? You know, all those sorts of things. Where do we find him? And let's send him a sales letter, you know. And then you need an accuracy check. So again, that's an automated process. And all of this is done in basically 7 steps. So those are simple examples of workflow automation that you can implement here today. So the more tailoring that you want, the more steps there are, but it's still measuring the elapsed time of running the robot in minutes, you know, not hours or days that you do in a manual process. So we've also had a look at this target market determination problem, and we can not only use robots for measuring compliance with the statute and compliance with the case law that's now coming out, but also compliance with fiduciary and duty of care obligations. So that robot is here and alive, can be done today, as is the automation of internal policies and procedures. So I think, David, we looked at your compliance manual about a year ago, which is, 100-odd pages long or something like that. But with all the changes in the law, it has to be regularly updated, and that can be now done automatically. So there are no, the nice thing is that there are no limits to the volumes of all of these things. But what I can tell you that if you look at the AI manual using toys like ChatGPT, then you're going to create work usually and not save work. And we've got some real live examples of exactly that. So, a word of warning is that, Microsoft Copilot, for instance, which you just buy, the sort of Harvey Norman model, if you like, in their Microsoft license agreement, there's a deliberate warning not to use it for professional work. So, if I go back to those two triangles, there's millions of people and entities at the bottom of those triangles. There are very, very few at the top, and the further these industries develop, the fewer people there will be at the top. And that's the only place that you need to be or should want to be at least, as a professional person. So what I'm going to offer you, Scott, David, Luke, 3 robots for 6 months, free to trial. All right? You can check it today. Yeah. So we'll give you a starter pack free for 6 months. Yeah. Yeah, check them. They don't look like the previous speaker, I have to say. Well, unfortunately, they don't have arms and legs. But anyway, that's the offer that we give you. You get a starter pack for free. We'll tailor them for your specific needs, and away you go. And you can plug. I think you like to use Google Gemini inside Lifestyle, I think, don't you? Anyway, they can integrate readily with Google Gemini as the core of the egg, right? No problem with that. So, and then you can select either the 3 applications I've just briefly mentioned, or you can, we can select some others. But there's 80 that you can select from right now. So that's what we do at Actium. We're here, alive and well, fighting off the perils of our colleagues in Canberra, but like everybody else in our sort of community. All right, thank you.
Thanks, David.